In today's market update, we're going to be discussing the 40-day cycle troughs that are forming in the various markets that we have been tracking. It has been 3 weeks since my previous market update. I've been relaxing on the Amalfi Coast, which has been rather wonderful, but it is now time to turn our attention back to the markets. We will start, as usual, with the S&P 500. This is SPX data, and in recent market updates, we have been discussing the fact that the 5th of August cycle trough was probably a trough of the 40-week cycle. Now, I'm not going to be taking a step back and zooming out to provide you with a bigger picture analysis, because if I did that, these videos would be much too long. So I would encourage you to go back and take a look at previous market update videos where I do discuss the unfolding picture, so that you can understand why it is that we have a 40-week cycle trough at the beginning of August, as discussed in our previous market update video, which I mentioned was recorded 3 weeks ago, which is on this day over here. We were expecting price to reach up to the peak target generated by price crossing over the 20-day cycle FLD. That target was at a level of 56.10, and as you can see, price did reach up to that target. It didn't really get much beyond the target, as you can see. Now, when price reaches a target, it does not necessarily mean that the move is over, but it does provide us with additional information when price struggles to get much further beyond the target generated by price crossing the FLD. And in this case, price did certainly struggle to get much further. At around the time that the 20-day cycle trough formed in the markets, we were expecting the 20-day cycle FLD to provide support, and we have a bit of a question mark regarding the 20-day cycle trough in the SPX and also in other markets. Here you can see the 20-day cycle trough has been phased as occurring over here in the 3rd week of August below this price point over here. However, at this point over here, price came down and found support at the level of the 20-day FLD. Is it possible that the 20-day cycle trough only formed over here on the 29th of August? Yes, it is possible, but if we measure the number of days, you will see that is 24 days. That might not sound very long for a 20-day cycle, and indeed it is not impossibly long. And so it is possible that the 20-day cycle trough did form on the 29th of August. However, the average length of a 20-day cycle is 17 days. And if you don't understand why that is, I would encourage you to download the 10 core concepts document that I will provide a link to in the description below this video. And so at the 17-day mark, this is also a very likely position for the 20-day cycle. How can we explain the fact that the more prominent trough formed 10 days later? You must understand that cycles influence markets. It is not an absolute science, and so cycle troughs will form, but there are occasional anomalies. Of course, if we position the 20-day cycle trough as having formed there on the 29th of August, then the next 20-day cycle trough would be expected to form in only 17 days. In other words, in the middle of September. However, if the 20-day cycle trough formed as suggested by this analysis on the 22nd of September, then you can see we get an expectation for the next 20-day cycle, which will also be a 40-day cycle, as having formed pretty much over the weekend that has just passed. And so for that reason, it is more useful to consider the 20-day cycle trough as having occurred, because it gives us a more focused nest of lows for the 40-day cycle. That 40-day cycle trough, as you can see from this nest of lows, is expected to form about now. It might have formed on Friday, but we need to watch as price crosses above FLDs to confirm that the 40-day cycle trough has formed. Normally, following a trough of 40-week magnitude, we would expect the 40-day cycle trough to form at about the level of the 40-day FLD, but it has failed to do so here. Price has crossed down below the 40-day FLD, and it has generated a target of 53.85. That is over here. Let me draw an arrow there. Price didn't quite reach down to that target, but it very nearly reached there, and so we need to be on our toes for this 40-day cycle trough to form. Is it possible the 40-day cycle trough still lies ahead of us? Yes, of course it is possible if the 20-day cycle trough should be displaced to the 29th 29th, then we are looking at that cycle trough only forming later this week. But things are looking good for the 40-day cycle trough forming now, and if we take a look at our composite model line, which takes all of the cycle information, recomposes it, and generates a line indicating what would have happened in the past if the only thing influencing this market were the cycles that have been found in the analysis, and in the future indicates what would happen if these cycles continue beating with the same rhythm, you can see we are expecting a bounce up now as price rises out of the 40-day cycle trough. Here are the 10-day and the 5-day FLDs. You can see they are forming a bit of a cascade pattern, which does warn us to expect a price move upwards as price bounces out of the potential trough. In the Nasdaq, we have very much the same situation. Here is the price cross above the 20-day FLD. Price did reach up and achieve the target of that price cross. We have the same 40-week cycle trough over here on the 5th of August. Where is that 20-day cycle trough? Again, it is a little difficult to position. The analysis here has placed it on the 22nd of August, but it is possible that the 20-day cycle trough only occurred later in the same position that we discussed in the S&P 500 on the 29th of August. But for now, this is the analysis that we are tracking. Here you can see, again, a 40-day cycle trough is expected to form. We have a very neat nest of lows, which is often an indication of a good analysis. It is not, of course, an exact science, and so that does not prove this is the correct analysis, but it does lead us to expect a 40-day cycle trough to form about now. Furthermore, we have price crossing down below the 40-day cycle FLD, generating a target of 18,530. That is just over here. Now, it is a little worrying that we have seen price exceeding that target. Price failed to find support at the level of the 40-day FLD. Is it possible that some bearishness is coming into this market? It is possible, but we have not seen many clear signs of it yet. Again, in the Nasdaq, we will be expecting price to bounce out of the 40-day cycle trough, and we will be watching those signs of bearishness with great care to see whether we need to pay more attention to them. The composite model line provides us with a little bit of a warning, if you like, about perhaps some bearishness creeping into the market because of the fact that the price peak did not reach up to where the composite model line peak was. That's an indication that price did not really fulfill the expectations given to us by the cycles. Furthermore, price has dropped way down below the level of the composite model line, informing this 40-day cycle trough. Again, a little more bearishness than might be expected, so we should certainly pay attention. We've been looking at the ASX, the Australian stock market, in recent videos, and as discussed in the previous market update, there is a question mark surrounding the magnitude of this trough. We need to be aware of the principle of commonality that tells us that markets around the world move with a great deal in common, and that their cycle troughs tend to occur at the same time. The 40-week cycle trough has occurred in the US markets, as we have just seen on the 5th of August. There was also a prominent trough in the Australian market, and that could very possibly have been the trough of the 40-week cycle. But this analysis has not been updated by the software, and the reason for this was discussed in our previous market update. The thing is, there is no anomaly in terms of the analysis that we see presented. We have a very messy nest of lows for this 40-week cycle trough, indicating that it is certainly possible that the 40-week cycle trough did occur on the 5th of August, and it is also possible that the analysis is going to shift soon to display that possibility. However, as discussed in the previous market update video, we have not had any anomalous price action. If we take a look at this M shape, we have a lower middle trough, or the 40-day cycle trough, but that would only be anomalous if this trough that we are still expecting to form in about the middle of September, or perhaps later this week, forms well above the level on the 5th of August. How do we deal with this kind of situation? The way that I deal with it is I tend to hide the longer cycle troughs because I'm not convinced about their position. It is possible that a 40-week cycle trough formed here. It is also possible that that was only a 40-day cycle trough. So let's hide the troughs and focus on what is happening right now. Given our uncertainty about the magnitude of the trough on the 6th of August that occurred in the Australian stock market, I have limited the display of the diamonds to show only diamonds for the 40-day cycle and shorter. I am absolutely convinced that this trough was of at least 40-day magnitude. It could have been 40-week magnitude. But we don't worry too much about that possibility. Let's take a look at the interactions with the FLD. Here is the 20-day FLD, and this price cross up above the 20-day FLD generated a target of 80.85. Here is that target over there. Now, price slightly exceeded that target, as you can see, which is a bullish indication, increasing the chances that the 40-week cycle trough did in fact occur in early August. But it does not deny the possibility that that trough was only 40-day magnitude. Price then crossed down below the 20-day FLD, on its way down to the next 40-day cycle trough. Now, if the 40-week cycle trough occurred in the beginning of August, then this would be only a 40-day cycle trough. On the other hand, if this was only a 40-day cycle trough at the beginning of August, then this would be our big 40-week cycle trough. Price has moved on, but it hasn't moved on very strongly. Again, we're inclined to think that the magnitude of the early August trough was probably the greater magnitude, in other words, 40-week cycle trough that formed there. Now let's display our 40-day FLD, and the interesting thing about the 40-day FLD is that the Australian market has now come down to the 40-day FLD. It would appear to be finding support at the level of the 40-day FLD. I've already mentioned it in today's video, the fact that following a trough of 40-week magnitude, and this is possibly that trough that occurred at the beginning of August, we would expect price to find support at the level of the 40-day FLD, and so we are watching the 40-day FLD with great interest. If price does find support at the 40-day FLD, then we would upgrade the magnitude of this trough at the beginning of August to 40-week magnitude, and this would be our 40-day cycle trough that is forming now. Either way, we are expecting a trough of at least 40-day magnitude to form now in the Australian stock market. The composite model line in the ASX provides us with some more bullish information. I pointed out in the Nasdaq that when there is a divergence between price and your composite model line, that gives us a clue as to some non-cyclic influences perhaps that are happening in the markets, or at least influences that do not match exactly the analysis on your charts. And here we have a bullish divergence. You can see the composite model line tells us, of course, that we are expecting a trough to form now. If that trough has formed above this level over here, that would be a bullish divergence. At the beginning of last week, we had a bit of a bullish divergence as well, because the peak occurred later than was expected by the composite model line. A later peak indicates more bullishness than expected. And of course, it occurred slightly higher than the composite model line would have us expect. And so we are seeing signs of bullishness in the Australian market. But we will need to watch to see how this 40-day cycle trough forms before we are absolutely convinced of positioning the 40-week cycle trough at the beginning of August. Let's take a very quick look at Nifty. It is a much requested instrument. I'm not again going to present the bigger picture. I did that in the previous market update video. I would encourage you to go back and take a look at that. We were looking at a cycle trough of at least 80-day magnitude forming at the beginning of August. That cycle trough, you can see, has now been upgraded to a 40-week cycle trough, in my opinion, which of course matches the commonality with the other stock markets around the world very well. Again, we have a question mark surrounding the position of the 20-day cycle trough, because price didn't really form a trough at all when it was expected to form a trough in the 20-day cycle. Price is now moving down into a 40-day cycle trough. Notice the nest of lows that has been displaced very much to the right in this analysis. The reason for that is because the cycle wavelengths have been measured as having been stretched recently, and that is because of the position of the 40-week cycle trough. Without going into too much detail, I would like to point out that we don't focus too much on the recent wavelengths of those cycles. Because of the principle of variation, we know they will change, and so we are focusing on the average length of the 40-day cycle, which is of course 34 days, which indicated that that the 40-day cycle trough might have occurred over the past weekend or perhaps earlier today. We do pay some attention, of course, to the recent wavelengths of those cycles, indicating that the 40-day cycle trough could be expected to form any time from about now until about the third week of September. Displaying our FLDs in the Nifty, you can see that we have a lot of bullishness in this market at the moment. I've pointed out before that the 40-day cycle trough is likely to form at about the level of the 40-day cycle FLD. Price is still well above that FLD, which is a bullish sign. It is just possible that the 40-day cycle trough is going to form at about the level of the 20-day cycle FLD. So we need to watch as price interacts with that FLD to identify the position of the 40-day cycle trough. Gold has been interesting because it has been moving up, as discussed in the previous market update, to an 80-day cycle peak. And the previous market update I recorded 3 weeks ago, which was on this day over here, I mentioned the fact that the 80-day cycle peak was expected to form at about that time. And so far, the highest price that we have seen has been that price over there. We are still looking at an 80-day cycle trough to form in the markets, and it was expected to form about last week. Notice this potential price trough that formed over here. The trough analysis in gold has become a little difficult to phase. This does often happen with gold, which has cycles that could be synchronized at their troughs or at their peaks. However, recently the trough-based analysis in gold has proved fairly reliable, and it looks as if though it is continuing to do so. You will notice in this analysis that where we had a 20-week cycle trough over here in the beginning of June, that has both moved forward by about 2 weeks, and it has also been upgraded to an 18-month cycle trough. Is that certainly the 18-month cycle trough? Again, I don't have that level of confidence in this analysis, and so what I will do is hide those longer cycles for the moment. We will have to loop back and reconsider the longer-term analysis soon, but for now let's focus on this 80-day cycle trough. The displacement of this cycle trough over here has also caused a displacement of the 40-day cycle trough over here. That has pushed the 80-day cycle trough forward in time. That has been necessary, of course, because of the fact that price has simply not been coming down into the 80-day cycle trough. If we take a look at our 20-day FLD, we were expecting price to cross down below the 20-day FLD in an F category interaction as price moves down into this 80-day cycle trough. And it is very likely that that is the F category interaction. Price came back and found resistance at the level of the 20-day FLD. Again, not unusual. We label that a GH category pair, where price finds resistance at the level of the 20-day FLD. We are now looking for the 80-day cycle trough to form. Is it possible that the 80-day cycle trough actually formed here? It is certainly possible, as you can see from that nest of lows. Price is currently still below the 20-day FLD, so we are watching for the 80-day cycle trough to form, and when price crosses above that 20-day FLD, we will likely be confirming the position of that 80-day cycle trough. Once that has been confirmed, we need to step back and take a look at the longer picture. Finally, Bitcoin. In recent market update videos, we've been discussing the fact that the 18-month cycle trough most probably occurred in early July. It was tempting to move the 18-month cycle trough to this later trough that occurred on the 5th of August, but in recent market update videos I've discussed the reasons why we did not do that, and I am still in favor of the fact that the 18-month cycle trough works better in early July. This has resulted in this M shape so far. What price is now doing is coming down and forming an 80-day cycle trough. Of course, if the 18-month cycle trough did in fact occur in August, as it did in the stock markets that we have been tracking, then this would also be only a 40-day cycle trough. However, the shape of the cycle does not render this analysis invalid, and so I am continuing to track it. Furthermore, our interactions with the 20-day cycle FLD are more in favor of this analysis. In the previous market update video, I pointed out the fact that price had only just managed to cross above the 20-day FLD over here, which we label as an E category interaction because it is the interaction that follows the formation of the 40-day cycle trough. I pointed out that we were expecting an F category interaction next, but that we might experience price tapping the FLD. That is pretty much what happened over this period of time here. Price failed to cross strongly below the FLD. It dipped below it for just a day, and then it struggled back upwards towards its target. It failed to reach the target generated as a result of price crossing the FLD over here, which was a bearish sign. It then did cross below the FLD over here, and that is our F category interaction. We are looking for the 80-day cycle trough to form about now in the market. Have we seen a GH category interaction pair? Not really, because price has failed to get back up to the FLD. You might consider this a GH interaction pair. How could that be an interaction? Price doesn't even touch the FLD. If you read the details of the FLD trading strategy, you will know that some interactions between price and the FLD can be described as price reaching towards the FLD instead of actually touching it. The important thing is that these interactions have to happen within certain time limits. If price comes up to the 20-day FLD only now, we might be wary of the fact that it will be a late GH category interaction. But considering the elapsed time, we need to bear in mind that this could be our A category interaction that will be forming when price comes up to the FLD. If you don't want to be watching the 20-day FLD, you can of course watch the shorter FLDs. Look at how price is now currently interacting with the 5-day FLD. Then we have the 10-day FLD and then the 20-day FLD. This is the beginning of a cascade pattern, and so we are going to be watching with great interest as price attempts to cross above these FLDs. As it does so, we will be able to either confirm the fact that the 80-day cycle trough has now formed in the markets, or the fact that we might have another move down into this 80-day cycle trough. I do hope you found this market update useful and interesting. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below this video or join us on our Hurst Cycles Discord server. I look forward to hearing from you.